Caley, thank you so much for including your work. And this is really interesting here. A little tricky. Let me use what you asked me to help me, but the spacing between words is what. Yes, indeed. That adds a moving part, so to speak, right? So yeah, it is more complex. I second guessed myself, and I think I ended up making and ice too close together. I disagree, and I'm going to comment on that in 1 second. I'll explain why it appears that's too close. So, okay, let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so first thing I do is in these video critiques, and if you've looked at some of the other videos, you'll notice that the first thing I do is I take you over to the announcements area just to reiterate the importance of viewing these announcements every week. The announcements are important because they're your lifeblood to success in the class. There's a ton of video tutorials, tips and tricks, caveats, examples, etc., etc. You definitely want to take a look in here. Pop in here 2, 3 times a week. I often populate this area midweek with additional resources. So these are very, very important. There's several videos within, and this is really important too, this Welcome to Week 2. There's a video in here called How to Kern Fire and Ice on the Computer. I think that's what it's called. Let's double check. It's called how to kern the phrase fire and ice. So you want to take a look at those videos. They're extremely important and extremely helpful. In that Welcome to Two announcement, in that video I just mentioned, this is the document I've included. And I really took my time spacing this out expeditiously and correctly so I could use it for an example. So I would consider this to be perfect letter spacing, perfect word spacing. So let's go ahead and use that in comparison to your work, and we can see where we can find some improvements. Okay, so I think that your letter forms are okay. There's some areas that can be addressed. I mean, this teardrop isn't exactly an exact depiction, but for the most part, your letter forms are pretty good. See, that stroke, that vertical stem right there is pretty thin compared to the original. So really watch your craft. The letter spacing is really, really wide. So we really want to address, remember our rules of kerning from last week. We want to address those. Let's go through each space here and let me describe what I'm seeing. Okay, the space between, and again, feel free to use this as reference. As a matter of fact, you can screenshot this so that you can look at it while you're assembling your final iteration for fire and ice. At any rate, I think that E is too far from the F. So you want to move that in. Oh, by the way, watch your serifs. Look how beautiful, streamlined, and tapered these bracketed serifs are. Yours can seem a little bit bulky, so you definitely want to watch your depiction of your serifs. The other thing, before I get into spacing, I also want to mention overshoot. Right? I'm seeing overshoot, but not really as enunciated as they are here. Overshoot is, of course, covered in week 2. What I would recommend for additional information on overshoot is just Google typographic overshoot to get a really good idea of what that is. Overshoot dictates that curved letter form should reside just a bit above the mean line and a little bit below the baseline for lowercase letters. And conversely, for uppercase letters, curved letter form should fall a little bit below the baseline, a little bit above the cap line. And we can see that here. Here's where we have overshoot. Let me zoom in here so you can see how that E rises above and below the mean line and cap line respectively. That's overshoot. Definitely want to depict overshoot in your final submission for Sunday. Okay, as far as word spacing, letter spacing goes, as I said, the F and the I are too wide. You want to move that I closer to the F. Then you want to move the R closer to the I and the E closer to the R. So you want to close down your spacing altogether here. The word and, I think, is spaced pretty well. Again, a little bit too wide, though. So we want to reduce that space and that space there. Ice is really wide. It almost looks like 3 letters, I, C, and E, as opposed to a word, ice. So you want to reduce that space there and that space there. Again, feel free to use this as your reference. Let's talk about word spacing. Word spacing can be tricky. Word spacing, we kind of use the same general foundational rules as letter spacing, and that being that you kind of want to make the volume be equal between words. Now, right now, yours has a little bit of a space. This seems like there's an extra space right here, and that's creating this situation where the viewer looks at this and is reading fire and ice, as opposed to digesting the whole thing as one group of words, fire and ice. Right here we see 2 groups of words, fire and ice. Okay, the reason that is a problem is because you've got these open counters. Remember, during week 1 we talked about adjusting the space between two letter forms that have open counters. And the reason being is because it creates extra surface area, which gives the illusion that that space is wider than it actually is. As a matter of fact, if this distance here were identical to this distance here, this distance would look greater because of the illusion caused by this greater surface area being caused by the open counter. So you want to reduce the space there. And again, use this for your reference. Okay, I hope my descriptions and recommendations make sense. If not, please let me know. I'll be glad to make any clarifications necessary. But I'd like to see those comments reflected in your final submission, which is coming up this Sunday. Okay? Any questions at all, Caley, please feel free to let me know. Thank you. Great start.